Many people have asked me about the placebo effect and how it relates to mind body interactions, mind body medicine, integrative medicine, etc. So, the word placebo is a Latin word originally, it's derived from a Latin word, and it essentially means I shall please. So, in every trial for any drug, for any pharmaceutical drug, and even for many types of surgery, including in the past heart surgery, 30% of patients have the so called placebo response, which means they get a beneficial effect, sometimes remarkably beneficial effect, which cannot be ascribed to the pharmaceutical or the procedure. And this has been called the placebo effect and usually kind of dismissed. But if a certain process gets a 30% response, and in many cases a very remarkable response, then it must have a mechanism. And here is the mechanism I suggest. Every thought has a representation in the brain, in the neural networks of our brain. Every thought is also associated with the release of neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters, and many of them are things like opiates, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, they of course mediate the thought, which comes from consciousness, into a biological response. If I have the thought I'm going to lift my arm, then that thought creates a whole cascade of biological effects. So every thought has a biological response and, in fact, a neural representation. Now we know that our brain, our autonomic nervous system, our endocrine system, and in fact, our healing responses, homeostasis, are all in fact connected. So I would suggest that we do have a healing system, and that can be triggered by the so called placebo effect. Many years ago, there was a study that showed you could block the placebo effect to pain by giving somebody Narcan, which is a narcotic antagonist, which meant that when the patient took the so called pain relieving medication, which had no such pharmacological efficacy, but when they took it in the belief that it was going to relieve pain, their brain actually made opiates, which are pain relievers. So, do we make anti-inflammatory substances? Do we make immunomodulators? More and more, there is evidence that yes, that belief does become biology. And that's why some of the rituals that are associated with healing techniques in traditional cultures and shamanic cultures and in many other forms of medicine across the world where mind-body medicine and mind-body interactions are taken for granted, there are rituals. And the rituals help the person, the patient, focus their attention and their intention on a specific response. I believe that as we study the so-called placebo response, we will gain more and more knowledge of the healing system in our body and how we can consciously trigger this healing system so it's no longer left to our subconscious mind. As I've said before, yoga is one of those techniques which allows us to access the subconscious mind, which never sleeps. And this subconscious mind, so called, is regulating many things in our body: self repair mechanisms, the dance between the autonomic nervous system and the voluntary system, hormones, neurotransmitters, and many other mechanisms that still need to be elucidated. Understanding the placebo at a very fundamental level is to understand that mind, brain, body, and even gene activity are deeply connected. This is what we're learning from epigenetics as well. So I hope that helps.